Hello Plottr Otters, and welcome to another video tutorial concerning our outline templates in Plottr. The one that we're going to focus on today is Derek Murphy's 24 chapter outline template. Now this template is really great for commercial fiction. It works really well when it comes to lots of details in guiding you. So if you are the type of person where you feel like I need step by step exactly what to do within each chapter or within a couple of chapters, that you're definitely a plotter, this is probably going to be very good for you. If you are a pantser, you can still utilize this in some form based on what works for you. It's nice to have some guideposts and some ideas of what should be included and about where you should include it. So don't write yourself out of this in case you are a discovery writer. You can still utilize this as kind of a guideline and not stick to it quite so strictly. It just really all depends on your writing process, but this can work for absolutely anyone when it comes to writing. So we want to go over it, give you an introduction to it, help you understand it, and hopefully it will help you further your writing and help you understand the process of story structure. So let's get started. Welcome to our 24 chapter novel template. What you see before you are 4 different lines that section out the template and show you different areas based on act structure. So we've got the first act titled Hero and Ordinary World. That's what these first few chapters focus on. Next line, it's been broken up into Act 2, Exploring New World. Act 2 is actually broken up in half because we are focused on 4-part pacing rather than strictly a 3-act structure, even though technically it says act 3 acts. But we break up Act 2 into 2 parts so that it's a little easier to avoid that muddied middle and so that you know where you're going within the middle of the story. So Act 2B is Bad Guys Close In, and you can see that several chapters in here. And then the 4th line is Act 3, Defeat and Victory. Okay. In this template, we're going to go over the guidelines that are introduced within each scene card. So we're going to start with Chapter 1, Really Bad Day. Now, the beginning of Act 1 is all about the ordinary world, empathy, conflict, flaw and lack, want, problem, need. You're introducing a lot of things within the first chapter because this is the setup. So you're dealing with a really bad day. The first chapter is all about the protagonist wants. But they immediately run into a problem or a conflict, and that usually stops them or prevents them from getting what they want. And this is going to allow your readers to connect with the protagonist, and your readers are going to note that the protagonist is missing something in their lives. So you introduce readers to that, establish a 3-dimensional character with flaws and desires, problems, and unique personalities. Show the protagonist behaving as their normal self in this ordinary world and demonstrate what they want, a problem they have, or hint at what they will need to achieve it. I always say, please don't start with tea unless someone is being poisoned. That's interesting. So, in other words, don't start with your protagonist just staring out the window, enjoying the weather. That's a little boring. We need a hook, okay? So, what does the protagonist need but is not self-aware enough to realize? And what is the protagonist's character flaw? That shard of glass from years before, healed over, no longer recognized, but it's still causing him a little problems, okay? Little harm there. So this is part of the first act. Really Bad Day should be about 4% of the story, okay? Remember, these are guidelines, very much like the pirate code, merely guidelines. It doesn't have to be exactly 4%, doesn't have to be an exact word count, but most of these things should be happening within Chapter 1, Chapter 2, okay? Something we want you to take note of is that there are areas for ordinary world notes. The first few chapters introduce friends, family, home, school, workplace, but you need to know what's missing. You need to know what the wound is, what it is they're looking for. You don't want to start with a perfect, happy character who has everything unless, and this could be very fun to play with, you're taking all of it away from them. Okay, you need to give them space to grow. There's going to be unresolved emotional issues. They're probably shy, awkward, clumsy, embarrassed. I mean, pick your poison here. Maybe they hate their job or they just got dumped. So you need to show what they want, secret desires, and what they're working towards. So answering these questions is really going to help you zero in on that. And that's why we have these questions within the scene cards. So you can start thinking about these things and really considering what your character's source of conflict is. What are they reflecting on when it comes to their inner flaw, or what are they denying, remaining in denial about when it comes to that inner flaw? Chapter 2, something peculiar. This is something unique or strange that is going to happen, but they kind of dismiss it because, again, we're all very well and good at being in that zone of denial. I'm very good at denial. So something peculiar happens, something that's unusual for the protagonist. It doesn't fit in the protagonist's main worldview, and they'll probably dismiss it. They'll ignore it. Readers might be clued in. Okay, so the protagonist may be too distracted or busy, but you might give readers enough to go on where they're sitting there anticipating, oh, it's coming, I have an idea, because readers know a little bit more than the protagonist. So it's great to create events that foreshadow future problems. You can decide on the distractions for the protagonist and how you're going to keep them from realizing the actual ramifications of this event that's coming up. It builds tension, so consider allowing the reader to fully understand those implications. And something peculiar is going to happen around the 8% mark, okay? Grasping at straws. Things are really starting to fall apart in this ordinary world. Whatever it is that the protagonist wants, they're not succeeding in getting it. And they're also really trying hard to gain control. So these problems are worsening. The protagonist is given a peek into a different world and begins to feel a pull towards something else, and they start to second guess their choices. So that's going to cause a lot of internal conflict. This development may make them critical of the ordinary world, where once they were content or at least complacent, it was comfortable. Now they're starting to question things in the relationships that they have within it. But they can't be fully honest with themselves, and they want to maintain control and stay in the ordinary world because it's comfortable. Even if it's not great for them, sometimes it's still comfortable. So consider those flaws, create events to distract them from that goal. How do these events offer a glimpse of what could be different, what the new world would look like if they stepped away from that ordinary, same old, same old? How does the protagonist's perspective of the ordinary world change? And what does the protagonist try to do to maintain control? So this usually happens around the 12% mark of the story. Call to adventure. I always love that phrase. Something extraordinarily different happens and they can't ignore it. So there's a major setback there. The call to adventure can be an invitation. It could be a mission or an event. Whatever form it takes, it really can't be ignored. And it sets the protagonist on the path to the new world. Huzzah. This event must be something major. Okay, you can't dismiss it. So what is this call to adventure? Just an example of this is the arrival of a mysterious stranger with paranormal abilities, a natural disaster, a kidnapping. So how does the call prevent the protagonist from focusing on their previous goals? Well, it's a pattern interrupt, right? It disrupts the norm. It disrupts the ordinary. And now they're faced with something totally different in their path before them, as opposed to the humdrum of their ordinary world. So with the character and their flaws in mind, how does the protagonist react to this call? Because at this moment, this call to adventure is an invitation. And many times the protagonist is not willing to accept it. They go into that call to adventure kicking and screaming, okay? So how are they pushing back against it? What is their emotional state in light of the call? Are they mad? Are they depressed that things are being disrupted, that they cannot continue as they were? So this is usually going to happen around the 16% mark. And we've got a few notes here for the A story of what's happening here, the external inciting incident and the event taking place, because you've got your internal issues when it comes to the call to adventure and this inciting incident. But externally, what's happening here? Okay. In most books, the inciting incident should happen in the first few chapters. So start your book as near to the inciting incident as you can, but don't think of it as just one scene or one chapter. It's an intrusion on the ordinary world, and it's something big. Okay. So it's usually followed by denial, by refusal. They just want things to go back to normal. So here are some questions to think about. What object symbolizes this event and deepens character? How does the setting reflect the mood of the conflict? What's really remarkable about the novel or about the character and their setting? So just consider all of these things. Make some notes concerning the inciting incident, what could happen, the way it affects them. And then you'll be able to move forward from there. Head in the sand, chapter 5. This new interrupt, this pattern interrupt, it's causes conflict with the old. It reveals that there was actually a little bit of dissatisfaction with the ordinary world. Maybe they weren't so happy before. The protagonist refuses to deal with or accept the reality of the call to adventure, intrigue, tension, and mystery. Maybe some supernatural events are building, but the protagonist is trying to put their head in the sand. They don't want to face the new challenge or the new world. They want things to return to how they were. This could also be certain aspects of it, because sometimes a protagonist is interested in the new, but there are certain aspects of it internally that they're still burying their head in the sand about. Regret and doubt build as the protagonist resists the call to adventure. Continue to build those events so they can't ignore it. And consider how the new world conflicts with the ordinary. What makes the protagonist unable to continue on? I mean, they just got to face it. They can't ignore it anymore. And what's their emotional response to it? This is about the 20% mark of your story. And then the next bit is pull out the rug. Trying to fix ordinary world problems while resisting the lure of the supernatural world or different world, new world. The protagonist is still trying to fix issues and resist the pull of the call, but now something happens to pull that rug out from under them. There's really no escaping it. They just have to. There's a point of no return. So again, they have to make a choice to accept the call and walk through that door. Kicking and screaming. You will find that many times the protagonist makes that decision involuntary. They don't necessarily want to. Whatever reason that they do it, they're personally motivated and they have to get involved even though they don't want to. Or maybe they're personally motivated and they have to get involved and they do want to, but it's causing crisis and conflict within because of what they're having to give up in order to do it. So create a big event that the protagonist can't ignore and make it personal. Be sure to use this scene to hook the reader. Always hook the reader. Stakes need to be high. Tension needs to be high. Remember, the protagonist is not bold at this point. They're reacting to things. They're not actively participating in the story in that way. They're not consciously making decisions where they've got a plan in place. They're not being proactive. So we're reacting right now. And this is all happening around the 24%, 25% mark of the story. And it also ends Act 1. Now, this is your story internal example, and it's also the first plot point, like your first major plot point. So because things have been getting weirder, they get roped in, something happens, they have to get into that action. Here's just some examples of, notes that you can make as far as what could happen here with that plot point, with that inciting incident. Did they meet a teacher that something changed their perspective, a revelation of supernatural abilities? Was there a murder or death, an accident or robbery? What is it that forces them to make that decision to accept the call? This is your protagonist stepping off the cliff or going into the rabbit hole, and it may not be a physical change of a location, but it is a change of circumstance. So ask yourself these questions again, and then see where you go from there. And remember that these are guidelines, and you can change stuff around. Just get some words on a page. Always get some words on a page so you can work with it. Okay, so we're in Act 2, exploring new worlds. So we meet new characters. Your protagonist is finding their place and role in this new world. The protagonist has passed that point of no return. This could be a magical world. It could be just an unfamiliar situation. Their daily life moving forward is going to be different, though. There's going to be new surroundings, new circumstances. They're in this phase of must adapt. So by the end of this plot point, we really need to have most of the characters, if not all of the characters, introduced. Especially antagonists, enemies in this section don't necessarily need to be the antagonists or their minions. They could be team members or allies who feel threatened by the protagonist at first. So maybe they start out as antagonists, but they're really allies. This is also a good time to introduce new mentors or a love interest who may act as a guide. So what's the protagonist's new role? How are they uncomfortable and fumbling about? Who are the other characters in the story? Make sure you really figure out the roles they're playing: allies, enemies, mentors, something else. And does the protagonist face hazing, bullying? There's all these little questions we really want you to consider to get your brain, thinking, so that you can start to build up that creativity and figure out where your story's going and the events that could be unfolding. Who is that guide for the protagonist? Who is the antagonist? What are the expectations for that? So this happens around the 28% mark. Games and trials. Struggle to belong. This is where the most interesting and exciting things the new world has to offer are presented. And the protagonist explores the new world. They meet new characters. They learn how to navigate it. It's not always fun and games. There are some challenges. These are great areas for try-fail cycles where the protagonist is trying new things and failing, trying new things and failing. So there's always going to be that conflict there. And it also may present a main conflict with the love interest. There's some form of training usually involved or learning required to harness powers or to harness skills or to be able to succeed and survive in this new scenario that they're in. But they're dealing with a lot of internal doubts and confidence issues. So what are these possible new skills or new abilities that protagonists may have had? What do they need to do to grow or control them? You need to demonstrate that, all of those feelings, all of those try-fail cycles. So showcase what the world has to offer through the protagonist's actions and training, and use this as an opportunity to really wow your readers and push them forward through the story. We don't want anyone to put your book down. Games and trials occurs around the 32% mark. Earning respect. There should be a small victory. We don't always want your protagonist to fail. We want to be really rooting for them and have a few payoffs here. So even though the protagonist may not have complete control over their abilities, they experience a small victory that proves to allies and enemies that they are not incapable or hopeless, and they do gain some begrudging respect. They prove that they do belong and are beginning to build confidence in themselves. So answer these questions as to what kind of victory do they achieve? How do the allies react? How does confidence grow? What does that look like? And that's happening at the 36% mark or thereabouts. Now we're going to go back to the A story, and this is going to be an area where we're categorizing this, the way that they're earning this respect and having this victory, as like a first battle or a first pinch point within the story. Okay, so there are several chapters where the protagonist is learning about the new world, and there needs to be this build up right to this first pinch point area. And it doesn't have to be a literal battle. The first major interaction with the antagonist where they have a small win, it doesn't have to be huge. And we don't want it to be huge, because the bigger it is, the more those stakes and impact need to increase as the story unfolds. So it could be smaller. Maybe the antagonist wants something the protagonist has, or needs them to do something, or has a score to settle. But it's clear that there are stakes involved, and sometimes you need to make the stakes as dire as possible, but it really depends on the way that you are building the tension and building up to the final battle or final conflict. So that's going to be a pacing issue. Ask yourself, what's the worst thing that could happen, and should you put it in there, or do you need to save that for a different pinch point? Okay. So what can you add to make the setting reflect the mood? What can you add to make it epic? What can you add to deepen character? What's remarkable about this setting? So these are all pinch point notes that you can put in here. Forces of evil. Stakes are raised, antagonists revealed. In the previous chapter, the protagonist reached a status quo and feels a bit more confident because they had a win. But now the forces of evil make themselves known and a new threat is realized. The protagonist comes to understand what they have become involved in, and it's real dangerous for the first time. So this could be a face-to-face battle, a remote attack on a larger scale, but it creates a clear picture of the antagonist and their ultimate goal. So show the protagonist and their allies having small successes as they work towards the goal. Detail how the antagonist forces are working toward the same goal and build that tension, because conflict is key. Conflict is what pushes the story along, whether it's internal, whether it's external. This is what builds that tension and makes us sit there and go, well, I cannot put this down. So demonstrate the protagonist's new understanding of the antagonist and hint at the antagonist's ultimate goal. Portray how the protagonist is humbled by the attack and the realization of what is actually happening. So this should happen around the 40% mark. Problem revealed. The protagonist feels down and overwhelmed once more as they realize how much they do not know. And this has been revealed by the challenges in the previous chapter and the protagonist realizing that they've been left in the dark, which is often the case in a lot of these scenarios. Their allies knew the danger and true level of threat. They didn't tell the protagonist. They didn't let the protagonist in on this. The reader might know a little bit more, which is also a way to increase tension for the reader because they're waiting for the protagonist to figure it out. They're like, oh, don't turn left, turn right. There's someone hiding behind the door. So you don't want to give too much away, but the protagonist really needs to feel left out, misunderstood, or like they don't belong. And they confront the allies and demand answers. They may be brushed off initially and told they're not ready or need to learn further to develop their powers, but they will insist. So demonstrate how the protagonist reacts to the discovery that they've been left in the dark. How do the allies react to being confronted? Create a tense scene that balances the protagonist's shaken confidence in the allies and themselves with a newfound strength to defend themselves and stand up for what they deserve. This is going to happen around the 44% mark. Now, this is your story B notes for the internal midpoint of what's happening here. At the first battle or first pinch point, which happened in chapter 9, the protagonist faces new challenges but remains in a defensive role. So they're dealing with circumstances that are beyond their control. And if they try to solve an issue, they are thwarted or make things worse. They might accidentally hurt someone, their friends, family. They might begin to fear and distrust them because they have secrets now. So they question their identity and worldview, which leads to a personality crisis, which leads to a shift in perspective. So this is the part where you're really working on these internal aspects of the way the external is affecting them. And remember that a lot of internal things that are happening are then going to determine externally events of the story. So about halfway through the novel marks the point where the protagonist decides to be proactive, this internal shift where they're like, that's it. It is time. It's time to make some decisions. They decide to stop being a victim. They vow to do whatever it takes to win. They're probably forming new goals, and even if they aren't sure how to achieve them, they'll feel a really deep conviction that they need to achieve it. And this could be based on rage or anger towards the antagonist, and they'll have a little bit more confidence along the way. This could even literally be the protagonist looking at themselves in a mirror, wondering who they've become. So far, they've been refusing their quest, but now with new determination, they decide to fight back. So answer these questions to help you with the notes on this internal shift midpoint through the story. Now we are in Act 2B, bad guys close in. And this is the mirror stage, self-realization or a discovery. Up to this point in the story, the protagonist has been passive and reactive. And now armed with new information, backstory, and actual risks, they're going to make a conscious decision to move forward. And it's a good point for a big revelation or surprise twist at this stage. The protagonist may discover the extent of the conspiracy against them, making them second guess if they want to continue or if they are the right person for the task. And it may be a reevaluation of themselves, leading them to confront their weaknesses and define themselves and the person they want to be. So ultimately, they're going to decide to move forward. If they didn't, there would be no story. So what is it that makes the protagonist decide to continue on in the face of all they have learned? And this needs to be poignant. This needs to be important. Consider creating a plot twist or revelation that causes the protagonist to second guess their decision. Show the protagonist displaying true self-reflection, recognizing weaknesses and deciding who they want to be. But remember, they are not yet ready or willing to confront internal flaws, not just yet, but they are deciding to be very proactive. So this happens at the 52% mark. Plan of attack. Plan of action to thwart the antagonist forces or overcome the main problem. The protagonist is all in, so they formulate a plan of attack. They're going to work around the problem, and they're going to take action against the antagonist. And perhaps they have to stop the antagonist from doing something. Maybe they don't quite understand the antagonist's plans, or perhaps they don't truly know their identity, but there still needs to be, okay, I'm proactive, I'm moving forward. What do we do to thwart this guy or girl, for that matter? What are the antagonist plans? What needs to be done to stop them? Will the protagonist and allies face off against the antagonist forces, or will they try to solve a central problem? So consider pre-planning for future chapters, keeping the antagonist one step ahead for the time being. How will the antagonist stop the protagonist from foiling their plans? And this is going to occur around 56%. Crucial role. trusted with an important task. Once they have mapped out their strategy, the protagonist will be given a crucial role. This is their chance to prove themselves and be tested in the real world as the other characters are beginning to trust the protagonist. To really develop emotional angst and conflict, the protagonist must be responsible for what happens. So it's all riding on them in this crucial role. So show how the team is beginning to trust your main character. What is the crucial role that your character takes on? Why were they given that task? And decide if they're going to take on personal responsibility or stay at arm's length from the conflict. And this should be about 60% of the story. We're going to go back to your A story, the external part of this story, and just make some notes here. The second battle, which is about to unfold in the next chapter, may not be against the antagonist. It could just be forces that represent the antagonist or side characters that are causing your antagonist or your protagonist some pain, thorns in their side, so to speak. The battle could be a real one or a conflict that is the result of your main character taking action, like setting a trap, that doesn't work. So the protagonist is determined to see this battle through. They feel responsible for this outcome, even though chances of success are slim. So answer these questions again to really get yourself in the mood and to figure out what this second pinch point is going to be and what it's all about. Direct conflict. They execute the plan and come in direct conflict with the antagonist forces. So while the first battle may have been a bit of an accident involving low-level henchmen in which the antagonist didn't know who the protagonist was, the enemy forces no longer underestimates them and their allies. The second battle will bring the protagonist and allies in direct contact with higher level forces of the enemy, forces with more agency. So this could be an infiltration scene in which the protagonist tries to sneak into the enemy's lair or perhaps steal something from their enemy. So how are the protagonist and their allies putting their plan into action? What is the goal they are trying to achieve? Are they stealing an artifact? Are they trying to evaluate the antagonist's defenses? Because realize that we are inching towards a goal here and trying to put plans into action. What level of forces do they meet? Are they ambushed? Do they stumble into a surprise attack? So really use this scene to increase tension and leave the protagonist in dire straits. And this is going to happen at the 64% mark. Because they are in dire straits and because they aren't expecting their plan to go awry, there's going to be a surprise failure, okay? Being in direct contact with the antagonist forces means their identity is revealed, or real consequences may arise, or that's like someone dies, one of the friends dies, there's permanent disfigurement. I mean, these are just examples of what could happen as a result of this surprise failure. But the plan may fail for a variety of reasons, but in the end, they're in real danger, and it's all been shattered, leaving them at square one again. So this is an example of try-fail with the group, trying to get this done. So you need to deepen the problems for the protagonist and their allies. Don't be afraid to be aggressive in this scene. Kill off characters, injure characters, or remove a key to their success. I mean, you got to beat your protagonist up. Shake the allies and the reader in the face of this failure. Raise the stakes by having identities revealed, plans shattered, and the group at a loss for what to do next. This is going to happen around the 68% mark. Shocking revelation. The antagonist's full plan or true identity is revealed. Stakes are raised. There's a lot of guilt and anger. The protagonist learns new information in the new predicament they are facing, such as true identities or the full plan. And they may experience some guilt and some anger because they didn't know it before. They may feel like they should have known more and they shouldn't have put their friends in situations that hurt them or possibly killed them. They're upset that the antagonist outsmarted them, and they may feel personal responsibility for letting everyone down. So who is the antagonist? What's the full plan? What new information does the main character get, and how do they get it? How does this information inform future decisions moving forward? Because remember, we are still proactive in this phase. And what is the emotional cost for the protagonist? How does it impact their wants, their needs, and their ability to actually move forward? So this is another raising tension, raising stakes scenario, and also an internal attack on the protagonist where there's going to be more self-doubt involved that they've got to overcome. And this happens around the 72% mark. We're going to go back into internal because we were just talking about that. Your B story, all the internal stuff. Because the plan failed, The secret weapon backfired. The worst has happened. This is where you need to make some notes. We've got a lot of information in here that gives you ideas as to what you can do. So the failure could be due to the protagonist's character flaw or lack of knowledge. Could mark this as a period of depression, prompting a change in mindset. The protagonist has to give up what they want and they weren't prepared for it. Many times within a story like this, what the protagonist wants is not necessarily what they need, and they need to get to a point where they have progressed internally as a character that they can let that want go because it actually hurt others to keep pushing for it. And then they can actually go for what they need, which is actually better for them and everyone involved. So when they figure out what they've been holding on to and what's been holding them back or limiting them, and when they're prepared to sacrifice what they want for the greater good, they finally become the hero they need to be to defeat the villain. So this is a huge second plot point internally for the character. So you're going to answer these questions to help you when you create this scene, okay? And it's going to propel you and move you right on to Act 3, defeat and victory. The lead loses confidence. The forces are too great due to this internal shift in this mindset where they're realizing that they pushed for things they wanted that they shouldn't have. Having lost the battle, the protagonist loses their confidence. They give up as they face that dark night of the soul, that moment where the hero's just like, I'm done, tapping out. And they underestimated the antagonist. Their plan didn't work. They lost their one shot at getting it right. They feel powerless as whatever hope they had is gone. That leads to that cycle of self-doubt and failure. So adding to their problems, they may also feel guilt and responsibility. So what's the fallout of this? How did they underestimate the antagonist? You need to display that mental state, and it's going to further increase the stakes because we're sitting here going, snap out of it. You can do this. We know you can do this. So this is going to happen at the 76% mark or thereabouts. We need a pep talk at this point. So they may get this from an ally. They may get a pep talk from a mentor. What's at stake here? The protagonist no longer believes in themselves. They need someone else to give them some words of wisdom to pull them out of it. It's usually from an ally, a mentor, someone who can see that blind spot and who helps the protagonist really understand where they need to focus on now and how to keep moving on. Typically, their fatal flaw is not brought fully to light, but this is a really good point to have the protagonist attempt to face some parts of it. Having this pep talk rebuilds their confidence, reaffirms what is at stake, and presents the choice of how to move forward. So make sure you answer these questions. Who offers the words of encouragement? What information is shared? What steps can the protagonist take to face their flaw? How can this new information inspire them and give them courage to fight back? Reaffirm what is at stake and why the reader should care if the problem is resolved. Now we're going to go to seizing the sword. A deliberate choice to continue is made, even though it doesn't look like there's going to be any success involved. While the fatal flaw realized in Chapter 20 may not be fully healed, it has at least been addressed, and the protagonist now has the courage to seize the sword and make a deliberate choice to continue, no matter how slim the odds of success are. So it's a good opportunity to reveal a piece of critical information that has been hidden to this point, to give them an extra boost, extra determination to succeed. As the protagonist gears up for the final battle, they may need to complete tasks like getting a special weapon or gathering troops or forces. So what object or information does the protagonist receive? Bring the reader along for the decision to move forward despite slim chances. Don't give us a sum up because summing things up is just telling us what's happening. It's not showing us what's happening. Showcase the protagonist and allies gearing up for the final battle. What do they need to prepare? What do they need to attain? What is the plan? And that's happening at the 84% mark. Here's your story A, external final battle. So make some notes about this final battle to prep you for writing it. A protagonist is at the mercy of the antagonist scene. You know, what's happening there where the protagonist is caught so the antagonist can gloat. The final battle also includes a death of the protagonist scene where the protagonist or an ally, like a romantic interest, sacrifices themselves and appears to die. If this is a romance, don't you dare let them die. It's brought back to life. Maybe they're brought back to life in joy and celebration. But it's really going to depend on the story that you write. A love story is a little different than a romance. Romance is happily ever after. Love story is Nicholas Sparks who killed off everyone. Struggles for me. But it's up to you to decide what that story is and what your reader expectations are there. So make those choices. It doesn't have to be a literal battle either. It's just the last final straw, the most dramatic part of your story. It's what forces the protagonist to make a realization, change, or grow. And it's the place where they have a victory. So these are your notes where you're prepping for that. Ultimate defeat. Triumph of villain. All hope is lost. Confront fatal flaw. This is the all is lost moment for the protagonist and reader. The main character really thinks they understand their internal flaw, but this is where they finally face it. They go into battle confident, which leads to their undoing. The protagonist may be at the mercy of the antagonist, may be suffering through the antagonist's gloating speech. We always love a good monologue by the enemy. Good monologues. Where plot holes are filled in, plans are laid bare, because it doesn't matter since they're about to be killed, so they're just going to rattle off all of their witty plans to your protagonist. It's a great place to wrap up some loose ends as well, to reveal things. It's where the protagonist comes to a full understanding of their flaw and lets go of whatever was holding them back. And it may even be the antagonist who points the flaw out. The protagonist has no hope of winning until they are able to face it. So you're going to display all of these things. Confidence as they enter the battle, how their fatal flaw defeats them. Consider using this as a humiliation scene. Not fun, but consider it. Show the protagonist reacting to the defeat. Bring the protagonist to their lowest point, show how they have lost all they wanted and dreamed of, and make the reader really believe there is no way forward. Okay, so this is going to be happening at the 88% mark. Unexpected victory. Here is where the antagonist believes they have won. However, the protagonist now has a new understanding of themselves and the unhealed wound that was holding them back, and they decide to let it go or move past it. So their want versus need comes to a head here, and they make that conscious choice to go after what they need instead of what they want. So you're going to demonstrate the protagonist's new understanding and willingness to leave their wants behind to attain victory. Allow the antagonist time to gloat a little, as we discussed, but have the protagonist take that final step in their character arc as they finally transform and progress into their new self. Create the payoff for readers by presenting a satisfying ultimate victory over the antagonist. All the struggles have led to this moment. Don't be afraid to sacrifice more allies and characters in this scene, perhaps even the protagonist, but make sure you do it in a way that your readers are happy with, because you don't want to get them upset. This happens at the 92% mark. Bittersweet reflection. This is a temporary victory, innocence saved, how far they've come, usually with a series. So the protagonist has won the battle, and it is now time for a joyful celebration or bittersweet reflection. If it's part of a series, they may not have defeated the antagonist. They may have just driven them off or been in a battle with a powerful but lesser henchman. In a standalone book, they may have a symbolic object they have held from the beginning, which they now discard because it is no longer needed. Either way, they foiled the antagonist's plans and are a changed person. And there may be a deliberate letting go scene or perhaps an acknowledgement ceremony as they return to the now changed ordinary world. And the ordinary world is changed. It could be on an external level, but definitely internally, because the protagonist has changed on an internal level for sure. So decide that wrap up of the battle. Will there be a joyful celebration, bittersweet reflection? Show how the protagonist has changed and close all loose ends in their storylines, perhaps with a letting go scene. Conclude the storylines and character arcs of the other main characters and allies if necessary, and tie up any loose ends unless some of those loose ends are necessary for this optional next chapter, or it's necessary to leave it open-ended because you've got a series. So this is going to happen around the 96 to 100% mark. And these are our notes for that internal change that has occurred around this area. The protagonist returns changed. They've won. Though if this is a series, it's probably temporary because the antagonist was defeated, but something new is going to return. It may be the same antagonist that they need to defeat again. The protagonist once again faces challenges or bullies from the beginning of the story, but they may seem very trivial now, and the protagonist is no longer lacking. They've grown in confidence, they have a group of new friends, and they have a new hope for the future. So what have they lost? What have they gained? Is there an object or something that symbolizes those things? Just know that the protagonist is forever changed and ready for that next adventure. If this is a series, or if this is an an isolated book, if this is a standalone book, then they're forever changed in a way that is satisfying for the readers. Now we have this optional scene card at the end. It hints of future challenges or antagonists. Sometimes people use this as an epilogue. This chapter could be used to fill in any remaining plot holes, perhaps by having the protagonist in the hospital visited by someone who fills in any information they may have missed, which does actually happen in the next video that we're going to go over. While optional, this chapter can be very powerful and can be a coming full circle or represent the rebirth of the protagonist as they have shifted from ambition to service. They always wanted their own thing, tried to get what they wanted, but ultimately sacrificed it to save others and defeat the antagonist. So this represents a very big shift, and they may even deserve an acknowledgement ceremony, public recognition. It's a great place to offer hints at future challenges if part of a series. So show how the protagonist is recovering and dealing with the emotional fallout of the journey. Reaffirm the completion of the character arc for the protagonist. We want to have that payoff of something's changed, we have learned, we have grown. Show how the protagonist now functions in the changed ordinary world. Wrap up loose ends and acknowledge the protagonist within a ceremony, called up on stage. There needs to be some other payoff externally as well. Hint at future problems, or that all may not be well if this is going to be a series. And this, again, will happen at the end of the book. Now, what we've done is we've gone over the template and the different things that should be happening here. In the next video, what I want to do is I actually want to plug in the first book of the Harry Potter series, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. And I want you guys to be able to see the way in which this story actually fits this template beautifully, the events that unfold that really fit these beats. So go grab some sugar, do some jumping jacks, get some water in you, and in the next video we will analyze how the first book in the Harry Potter series really fits well within this 24 chapter template. See you in the next video, guys.